Hello everyone, welcome to another Flesh and Blood video. In this one, we're going to be taking a look at more heroes from the Hunted today with the new Draconic Ninja hero, Cindra Deck of Retribution. If you'll notice from the deck name, this is called Kinda Budget. The reason being is because Cindra right now is sort of this deck that you're playing pretty much 60 cards the same. There are some changes in this list because we're not on some cards that aren't as necessary. But if you had the resources to play the not kind of budget version of the deck, you can go find any of the tournament winning Cindra lists because they're all very similar to this one. But the reason why I think you sort of need that differentiation is because Cindra is definitely playable without all of the super expensive cards. Most of her deck is commons. In fact, the only M's still in the deck because they're necessary are Ignite, because you want to actually play your 1-cost cards, and Art of Dragon Blood, because, again, you want to play your 1-cost cards. None of the other cards in the deck, or the main board at least, are really expensive. I guess Ancestral Empowerment's in the deck, but I don't think that one is all too much. And you can easily play something over Ancestral Empowerment if you really wanted to. So, with that in mind, let's get started talking about Cindra Deck of Retribution. And there are legendaries here. We will talk about swaps. Cindra is a 4 intellect, 40 health, Royal Draconic Ninja hero. Royal just like the other new Draconic hero this set, Fang, although you're still not playing Tome. Again, just really watch for Regicide if that ever comes up. Cindra has the same ability to Fang, where if you hit a marked hero, you make a fealty token. Cindra wants to use them in a very different way, though, so we will talk about that later. And then her actual ability is very similar to Fi's, where it's an once per turn instant that costs 3. That costs 1 less for each Draconic Chainlink you control, but instead of getting a Phoenix Flame back from your graveyard, you instead equip up the 2 Draconic Daggers. Cindra's Draconic Daggers are the Kunai of Retribution. These are 1 power Draconic Ninja weapons. They are one-handed daggers, and they attack for 1 and have go again, but are destroyed when the combat chain closes. Cindra wants to use a lot of effects that flick their daggers, so you can bring them back later. Of course, you can still swing at them if need be. There are times where you will do that, but that's sort of the main game plan. To play cards like Burning Blade Dance, like, I don't actually think there are any more in the main board that flick, but mainly use a card like Flick Knives that will throw the daggers, destroying them, thus letting you get them back. For the other equipment, Mask of Momentum is sort of the most... Okay, I would say Mask is the most important piece, but it in reality is Flick Knives. I don't think you can play Cindra without Flick Knives, but Mask of Momentum is part of the reason why you can't play Cindra without Flick Knives. The way the interaction works with Mask of Momentum is if your opponent blocks an attack and then you flick a dagger, you are considered to have a hit on that chain link, which means on, say, if that was your second chain link, on your third chain link, if your first hit, your second was a flick, and then your third attack action hits, you'll draw a card. You can actually easily trigger Mask of Momentum. So this one is necessary, but the main draw comes from Flick Knives. And we've talked about Mask of Momentum a lot in the past, so I'm not going to talk about that very much here. Flick Knives is one we haven't really seen in many Ninja decks. Ninja hasn't been able to use Flick Knives very well till Cindra, and actually this set because of other Retrieve Dagger effects that you can play in the other Ninjas. Flick Knives is a card we've already talked about in these videos, even for the set. In the last video, the Arachne deck played Flick Knives, and next week also will play Flick Knives, just from how powerful this card is. If you don't know what they do, they are a 0-cost attack reaction that you can use once per turn that has you target a dagger you control that isn't on the active chain link, which pretty much just means you can't flick the dagger you're currently attacking with. And then you deal 1 damage to any target hero, and if you've dealt damage that way, the dagger is considered to hit and is destroyed. You always destroy the dagger, but if it deals damage, it's considered to hit. For Cindra, that doesn't really matter, but for any assassin, that does, because generally they'll have hit effects. Although all Cindra cares about is the ability to destroy her daggers mid-combat chain, which lets her bring them back, and get that bonus damage through, as well as counting as a hit for Mask of Momentum. These two pair very nicely with the brand new Assassin Ninja chess piece, Blood Splattered Vest, which this deck also plays. This is technically it's not the least required legendary, but I would argue it's the least required for this list since we're not playing Dragon Scalar Flight Paths in this one. Blood Splattered Vest is a 1-block blade break chess piece that says when a dagger you control hits, you may gain a resource, and put a stain counter on the Blood Splattered Vest. Then, if there are 3 or more stain counters on the vest, you destroy the vest. So it really does block pretty much. It's just in case they force you to block with it, play around. But the main way you're using the vest is on turns that you have a 1-cost attack, something like an Art of Dragon Fire or a Breaking Point, and don't have the resource available. Really, the only card you ever want to be pitching is like a yellow brand, or you could gain a resource off a drop, or you've played an Ignite beforehand. You'll be able to flick a dagger with Flick Knives, and then gain a resource to be able to play that 1-cost card. That's sort of the main draw of Vest. Your games are never long enough to get vast use, excuse me, to get vast use of Tunic, so the Blood Splattered Vest is a very potent tool for that position, because if it's turn 2 and you need a one resource, you have it. On turn 3, if you need a resource, you have it. Then on turn 7, if you need a resource, you can have it. That's sort of the point of the card. You can obviously get 2 uses out of it, and then 1 health if need be, which will happen, but still, this is a very good chess piece. You can play this deck without the Blood Splattered Vest. I would remove some of the 1-cost cards, but it's not as required as something like Flick Knives or Mask. We will talk about replacements for all 3 of these equipment later, because all 3 of them have definitely worse, but replacements that can be made. And then for our shoes, we're just playing Snapdragon Scalars. Normally, you'll see Cindra play Dragon Scalar Flight Paths, which I would argue are an upgrade. However, since this deck is on Snatch, instead of one of the other Go Again things that is a little more expensive, hence the sort of budget, you don't really use Dragon Scalar Flight Paths as often. They are optimal, but they're not for this list. This list is specifically using Snatch, which very hard to give Go Again unless you had the Snapdragon Scalars, which is why I'm opting for them instead. And as well as if you just don't own Dragon Scalar Flight Paths, in any other Cindra deck, Snapdragon Scalars work perfectly fine as well. Before we talk about the actual main board, I do want to talk about the equipment replacements, because that is where the deck's main bulk and price comes from. Fabrary, at time of recording, says this deck is around $450 on TCG Player. 400 of those dollars comes from Flick Knives, Mask of Momentum, and Blood Splattered Vest. About. Probably it's more like 350 of those dollars come from these 3 cards, but easily replaceable. More than cards in the main board. There are cards in the main board we did swap out, so those are more replaceable, obviously, but the equipment are very good. These are very powerful, and they're hard to replace. That's what I meant to say, sorry. They're hard to replace, but you can replace them to bring the price of the deck down. Just since they're so important, they are the main chunk of the cash you're going to spend on this. For the equipment you can swap out, for your headpiece slots, Mask of the Pouncing Lynx can be a decent replacement on a really big burst turn. If you do bring in Pouncing Lynx, this deck would probably want Salt the Wound as an addition as well. You would play that one in your deck somewhere so you can tutor it, as well as maybe Tenacity for some matchups. Put that one in your sideboard. But If you wanted a similar effect to Mask of Momentum, you can get a one-time draw from Mask of the Three Tails. For your glove slot, there are definitely a lot of replacements, but I think the main one would just be Danger Digits. This is a one-time flick. It's not as good as Flick Knives, obviously, but it's the closest thing. Flick Knives is the best upgrade for the deck. You could probably play this deck with, like, Pouncing Lynx, even Mask of the Three Tails, and, like, Sash of Sandakai, and still be fine if you had Flick Knives. Just, this is the closest comparison. Flick Knives is the most important equipment for the deck. And then for your chess piece replacements, Sash of Sandakai and Vest of the First Fist generate you some resources on demand. Vest is a destroy it on attack action hit to gain 2, but Vest is just whenever you want gain 1 if you've played a red card. I think Sash is a little better than Vest here, since you're generally only going to be spending 1 resource a turn, but Vest can turn into a dagger swing as well, so Vest isn't that bad. Either one of them, and then either Mask if you don't have the Blood Splattered Vest or the Mask of the Pouncing Lynx, or sorry, Mask of Momentum. You can play either of these. If you don't have Flick Knives, you can play Danger Digits, but again, it's going to be a lot worse. Moving on to the actual main board of the deck, I'd say meat and potatoes. Let's just talk about the cards that aren't attacks first, because you're fine. Pretty much all of your cards are attacks, but there are some that aren't. Ancestral Empowerment is sort of a core card, mainly because you're such a Mask of Momentum dependent deck. You can use Cindra's ability to keep your mask stacking, but if they block that third attack, you can't use the kunai to draw the card, you can only use it to extend. So Ancestral Empowerment is a way, since most of your attacks are ninja, very few aren't. Things like your generics or like Hunt the Hunter Breaking Point aren't. But a majority of your attacks are, you can Ancestral them to get that draw off of Mask. As well as the 3 block, a lot of Draconic cards block 2. Although a lot of Cindra's cards do block 3. Drop of Dragon Blood is a legendary one of, it's at rare. It's really easy to get. All it says is gain a resource and draw a card, but it costs 2, although it costs 1 less for each of your Draconic Chain Links. This is really good to just go 0 cost thing, 0 cost thing. Obviously, both have to be Draconic. Play drop to gain a resource, and then come in with any of your 1 cost attacks. Hunt, Demonstrate, Breaking Point, whatever. Drop is really nice in that situation because it is, again, 1 less card in your deck. If you think about that, very similar to Ancestral Empowerment, you technically only have 56 cards in your main board, which is really good because you want to be able to find your high impact cards, those being your Art of Dragon Blood, your 1 cost cards, as well as your Fire Tenant Strike First, because it's a 0 for 4. Any of your 0 for 4s, really, because they are more impactful than your head jabs, but of course you do need your head jabs for the deck to actually work. And that's all the non-attacks. There are more in the sideboard we will take a look at, but those are mainly defense reactions and tech cards. The rest of the deck is just straight gas, because this, of course, is just an aggro deck. So let's start with the payoffs. I think starting with the payoffs is a little better. Your Chain Enders, because a lot of the other cards are very similar. The first payoff is Art of Dragon Fire. This is a 1 for 5 with 3 block, which, if it's Draconic on attack, does 2 to any target. Cindra, obviously, can make fealty tokens. This is where she's mainly putting them, making other cards Draconic. Art of Dragon Blood is a very similar ask to become Draconic. And of course, even though we're not on Oath of Loyalty, that one requires all the cards you play in a turn to be Draconic. You can use fealty tokens to make these cards Draconic, your Rabble, your Snatch, your Art of Dragons, so you can get more chain links, allowing you to bring daggers back with Cindra. Or even if you have to start with like a Rabble and make it Draconic for your Lava Vein or your Burning Blade Dance to work, you can. So that makes Art of Dragon Fire very powerful, and this is a 1 for 7. It's similar damage to Chase the Tail, and that's the best card in Zen. So you get a very comparable damage card in this deck. Breaking Point is a 1 for 5 with Rupture, which is if you have 4 or more chain links, it gets an effect to destroy the hero hit's arsenal. Just a good arsenal destruction effect. You can't really afford CNC to play it in this deck, not because this is a more budget-based deck. The normal Cindra lists are playing this one as well. But Breaking Point is just an incredibly good arsenal disruption effect, especially for a deck like this that wants to play 4-card hands and 5-card hands. This one's just so easy to play thanks to your Blood Splattered Vest alongside your Flick Knives. The last real payoff, I'd say, because Demonstrate Devotion and Hunt the Hunter are cards that they're 1-cost cards, but they're mainly designed to just make your deck work a little better. We'll talk about them a little later. Is Wrath of Retribution. This is a legendary Draconic Ninja card, so only Cindra and Fi can play it, but it's about daggers, so there's no world that Fi ever touches this card, unless there's a different Draconic dagger, in which then that would break Cindra. This is a 3-cost, 3-power, 3-block that costs 1 less for each of your Draconic chain links, so you do want to have a lot of Draconic chain links. And it makes all of your daggers get 1 more power and 1 less cost to attack with this turn. Which means you could have a situation where you go card, Wrath of Retribution, and then swing in with both daggers, and play something like a Burning Blade Dance that will hopefully destroy one of your daggers, flick the other dagger, and then use Cindra to bring them back and get another 2-power dagger swings. So this can let you get some extremely big turns, and of course you're going to be able to get the daggers back next turn thanks to Cindra's ability. So a very good card that gives you a lot of damage. Just another, technically, since you're not normally swinging with your daggers, this is actually a 0 for 7. So better than Art of Dragonfire if you can pull it off. The rest of the deck is really just smoothing. Can we get the deck as consistent as possible? Art of Dragonblood is a card that I found hard to cut. It's a 0 for 4 that if it becomes Draconic, gets Go Again, and your next 3 Draconic cards cost 1 less. Of course, Draconic, all reds, making cards cost 1 less is really big because that's a free blue, as well as since all your 1-cost cards are very, very good. We already talked about Fire and Breaking Point. You can even technically use it to play things like Wrath of Retribution earlier, or even Drop of Dragon's Blood, since they are Draconic cards, if need be. Blaze Headlong is just a 0 for 4 if we played a red card. There are 57 red cards in this deck. That will not be a hard ask. The only time where that will never happen is if your opening hand is like 3 Yellow Brain with Cinderclaws and Blaze Headlong. So, good luck getting that one. Brand with Cinderclaw is the only card that we're playing more than just the red version of. The main reason being because it can make things Draconic, meaning we don't need fealty tokens for it. We can play Brand into something like an Art of Dragonfire or an Art of Dragon Blood to make them Draconic and get their effect without needing a fealty token already set up, which just, I think, makes them the best of the head jabs and why we're on Yellow Brand with Cinderclaw. Burning Blade Dance is very similar to Lava Vein Loyalty in its 3/3 stat line, but gets an additional on hit to flick a dagger, so just extra damage. Demonstrate Devotion is a 2 of that has an on attack to make a fealty token and gain Go Again if we have 2 or more Draconic chain links. Again, this counts itself. Very similar mechanic we see with a lot of Draconic cards. Display Loyalty is the same, but a normal 0 for 3 head jab stat line. Fire Tenant Strike First is a base ninja attack, but gives your next Draconic attack this chain plus 1 power, making it theoretically a 0 for 4. Hot on Their Heels, again, very similar to the others, just instead of an on-hit, or not even an on-hit, just a on-play make a fealty, this is an on-hit mark. So it is worse than the Display Loyalty, but it does offer you a mark that you can also just easily pop with Flick Knives because you're considered to hit a hero if you flick a dagger at them. So this, if it hits, will just convert into a fealty anyway. Hunt the Hunter is another 1 for 5 with an on attack of if we've played a red card, we just mark the hero we're attacking. Again, just some more fealty generation. Ignite is another M that was a little hard to cut because it makes the deck run so much smoother, since it pretty much just gives you an extra resource, letting you come in with one of your daggers, or something like the Demonstrate Devotion, the Hunt the Hunter, Breaking Point, a Draconic Art of Dragonfire, although if you do this wrong, you will not get to play the Draconic Art of Dragonfire. So I'm going to say it here. If you play Ignite and you plan to play an Art of Dragonfire, in response to the Ignite attack trigger, you need to break your fealty token. If you let the Ignite trigger resolve, activating the fealty token will be the next thing you do that becomes Draconic. So when you play Ignite, so you've already played the cards, the fealty can't see the Ignite. Before the Ignite can see the fealty, you break the fealty, so the next card you play is Draconic, and it costs 1 less. Quick tip, because people have done that and they've just lost the game because they couldn't go Ignite into Art on a 2-card hand. Or even not a 2-card hand. They just lost because they messed up really badly like that. But Ignite is a card that I think is necessary. It is, I think, a little expensive. Very similar to Art of Dragonblood, because it is a core card for the deck, just because it lets you play the deck so much smoother. Lava Burst is just a good chain ender, being a 0 for 5. There's not really much to say about it. Lava Vein Loyalty is just a standard 0 for 3 go again, if it's a second chain link or higher. Rabble is important because you're playing 57 red cards. I don't see a reason why you wouldn't play Rabble, even when you bring in blues. If you play tech card blues, which you normally do, you still have 54 red cards in your deck. Good luck hitting them. Good luck hitting the blues. Rising Resentment is at 3 because, again, we're 1-cost cards. This makes them cheaper. Ronin Renegade is just a head jab, but Draconic. And Snatch. The main sort of reason to want to play Snapdragon Scalers over Dragon Scaler Flight Paths is an on-hit to draw. Simple. Lets us keep an arsenal if it hits. Just another on-hit effect. Talking about the inventory, because it is sort of important. We have no D-Reacts, but there are so many matchups you actually need D-Reacts. Wax On is the only D-React that remains in the list that Cindra normally plays. This will come in versus matchups that have a lot of 0-cost cards. Assassin, because Assassin's really good against Ninja. You want to bring in the Wax On. Normally, these Sink Belows are Shelters from the Storm. But Shelter is expensive, and this is a sort of budget deck. So we're just playing the next best thing, a very close comparison in Sink Below. Bring these in whenever you need a D-React. Still into Assassin, I'd play all 9, honestly. Honestly, I would even consider going above 60 cards. I don't know if Cindra really likes that. I don't mind it against Assassin. But if you didn't want to, you could. I think it's fine, though. And then, Fate for Scenes are normally Loyalty Beyond the Graves. That's sort of the reason why it's not bad to go above 60, because you'll get a free draw of Loyalty later. Loyalty is a 3-block Draconic D-React that if you have 2 in your graveyard, you can banish them both to draw. Fate for Scene is nowhere on that level. I think Fate for Scene is like the 5th D-React you'd want in your deck, behind Wax On being probably the most important, if I'm being honest, in this meta at least. With Sync and Loyalty being a little more standard, I could see going down Wax On later, but keeping Shelter and Loyalty. And then I think Sync is better than Fate. So, Fate's the 5th best option. But the other 2 are more expensive and not necessary. So we're on 3 Fate for Scene. The last non-equipment is tech cards. Because we're not on Dragon Scaler Flight Paths, I opt for Poison the Well. There are a few reasons for this. One, can be the price. Tech cards can be a little pricey. Viz just got Living Legend, so Warmonger's Diplomacy is a little less important. The option might still be Warmongers because it's really good into Azalea, and Azalea is a pretty bad matchup for you. But that's, I think, the only important one that you'd actually want Warmongers for. And even then, you just want to gamble on them not hitting Riddle every turn, right? Like, that's even another winning play, is just doing that, hoping they don't hit every turn. Poison the Well is good versus life gain, which is a good counter to your deck. Even though they want to stop your things, you don't really have the most pressure if you can't draw your cards. But even if you do draw your cards, gaining life is really good because you're a deck with unpreventable damage. So Poison the Well is useful. The main thing I would play is Snag. I think Snag's up there, but also, as I said earlier, Dragon Scalar Flight Paths are not in this deck. Snag is really good with Dragon Scalar Flight Paths because you can block with that and then Snag, and then nothing they do other than if they hit you with a Beckoning Mistblade before, and it's new, right? But any react they play, any actual effect on the attack, can't increase it over that one block. They can shred you, so you can get shredded, which will hurt, but that's the counterplay around Snag. Poison was in here because we're not on flight paths. If we were on flight paths, I would play 3 Snag instead of 3 Poison the Well, or some amount variance. I would recommend having 3 of the same because you'll want it versus that one specific matchup, but you could split it if you really wanted to. You could go 2 Snag, 1 Poison, 2 Poison, 1 Snag, 1 of each, this, Snag, Warmongers, whatever have you. All are fine. And then the last 2 cards are equipment. Arcane Lantern is the best arcane piece in the deck. You want to know why? Because this is necessary, and this is necessary for every matchup, no matter what. And there is no Spellfray weapon slot for Ninja. So you have to play Arcane Lantern because we're on Spellfray Leggings because our whole deck's red. We're not pitching 2 cards for 2 AB. And legs are the least important slot in this deck. Other than that, there's no other equipment you want. The head, the glove, and the chest are necessary. Even if you swap them out to other things, they are necessary. You cannot play Arcane Barrier or Spellfray in those slots because these cards are so important, these equipment slots, for this deck. Shoes, swap it out, whatever. Shoes help fix bad turns. Snapdragon Scalers, if you get a turn of 4 cards that don't have Go again, it can fix it. Dragon Scalar Flight Path, not so much, but even then, Dragon Scalar Flight Path is really good with like Wrath or Retribution. Still usable to fix some turns, give you 2 1-cost attacks on like an Art of Dragon Blood turn. Can be good. But these 3 are necessary. Having 2 daggers is really good, but not needed. And then shoes are not that important, but again, there's no Spellfray weapon slot for Ninja. But with all of that, that is going to be the end of the video. Cindra is a deck that I think probably should get an Armory deck. Not because she's bad. I mean, Aurora's getting an Armory deck, and she is nowhere near bad. But because this deck needs 3 legendaries. You kind of need sometimes 4, honestly, because Dragon Scalar Flight Paths, even though they're very cheap, are still good. She needs some cheaper equipment, I think. Someone like Fang, there's a lot of common equipment you can play. Warrior, I'd say, is a pretty budget class. Even though the list I showed, I think, had 4 legendaries in it. But you can play a lot of commons instead. And for a class like Ninja, where most of your cards generally are pretty cheap, the only reason these ones are expensive is because they're, for the new aggro deck, in 2 months, they'll probably be like $2. Honestly, I don't think they'll be that much in a few months' time, of course. But for now, they're pretty expensive. But I tried to limit those down. There's no Oath of Loyalty in this deck. There's no Take the Tempo's cheap. I probably could have kept Take the Tempo in this deck, but I thought, why not? I mean, I'll just cut it down to the 9Ms and call it good there. But this deck still works if you want to play this version. If you didn't have all the cards. Again, as I said, there are more optimal versions. The lists that have won big events are pretty similar to this one. You can play those if you wanted a Cindra list that is more expensive because those cards are like $100 total that I cut out. Actually, they're way more. I think if I bring up February, I hope I don't have to blur that. I did not look at what was on that. But if you look at this list, it's $1,000. This is the A winning list. I didn't change any cards. I just moved it over. This is a winning list. They're on all the D-Reacts, Warmongers. This is $2 again. This card's expensive with the loyalty. They're on very similar main board. Other than that, pretty much. But the D-Reacts are big. And, of course, the equipment are expensive. So, really, Cindra is a cheap deck if you don't get all the fixings, but you do need some of them. You do need the flick knives, you do need the mask. The equipment is big, but it's half the price. So, I think it's a good comparison. I don't think anyone gets to this point in the video anyway for my spiel. I think people just look at the deck list because my average view time is like 2 minutes. I don't really care. Though, if you did make it to this point, though, I appreciate you. Thank you for watching the whole video through. I really do appreciate it. And so I do take a little bit of time. I'm going to be honest. I don't take the most time to make these videos, but I do appreciate you watching the whole thing through. Next video is going to be on the last new hero from the Hunted, which is Arachne Marionette and the whole brood. I don't know how long this video was. I think it's a little longer because I made it in 2 clips. But the next video is probably going to be a long one because there's a lot we got to talk about. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. Hopefully you'll enjoy the next one. And I'll see you in the next video. And then after that, we'll go to whoever else. But I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one. Goodbye.